It's table season in our crowded little shop here. Stay tuned, I've got another one that I want to show you. Today I'm going to start on making this dining room table for some friends of mine. Basically it's going to be 72 inches long and about 40 inches wide, and it'll be the standard dining room table height, which means the top of it will be about 30 inches off of the floor. So the first thing I'm going to do is I have taken and figured out basically the size of my aprons, because I know that from the edge of my table I'm going to bring my legs in an inch from each corner, and then my legs are going to be about 3.5 inches square going down, so I can get an idea from taking that 72 inches of length, knock off 2 inches at the end, I'm down to 70. Now I'm going to cut off basically 8 inches for the size of the leg, so I can rough my aprons in at somewhere in the neighborhood of 62 is where they're going to end up. So I'm making probably 64 or 65 long on the long side, and then on my short side 40, I'm going to knock off 10. My aprons are going to be about 30 inches there. So I'm just going to rough them out of this piece of walnut at probably 64 and 34. I've got 98 inches here, so if I go about 64 for my long sides and about 34 for my short side, that'll get me pretty close to what they're going to be when I finish them off. I like to try to take them and make them easier to handle by making them shorter. I also want to leave enough room to take off any extra that I might need to get them flat and square where I need them to be. So, oh, excuse me. So the first thing I'm going to do is I've got the edge here run through a straight line rip saw. So I've got a straight edge to start here from. I'm going to pull these over to the chop saw here, get this set up, get my supports moved all the way out to the end here, lock that down. Obviously I'm going to take my nice straight edge here and put that up to my fence, and I've marked my bore here where I want to make that rough cut. So we'll go ahead and do that. And if you'll recall from our chop saw, we always roll our thumb under and hold it here well clear of what the blade's going to do. We'll pull it down, make the cut, let the blade stop before I set it back up. I always do it that way because if my hands are here and here, they can't get anywhere close to in there. So I've got that one. That gives us a piece that's about 34 long, and this one is 64. And our rough stock here is in the neighborhood of 7.5 inches wide. I want my aprons to be 3.5, so I'm going to take them over to my table saw. I'm going to rough it out at about 3 5/8. So I've got a little bit of extra play to deal with my final width, and I'm doing that just because I know I'm going to run these through the jointer and the planer, and I just want them to be smaller and easier to handle when I'm doing that. So let's take them over here and to our table saw. I'm going to set this over here at 3 5/8. Will give me what I need, and you'll notice that when my table saw is not in use, I always have my fence over where the blade would be, and the blade is always retracted. That way, if any of my grandkids or somebody were to come over and get anywhere near the startup button, there's not going to be a blade spinning free out there that they could encounter. So, and yeah, I do have the guard off of this so you can see better what we're doing here. I would normally have my guard and a splitter in place. Got my blade up to the height that I need there, so I can see roughly 4 teeth sticking above my piece of wood. I got my push stick here. I'm just going to run these through real quick to get them down to the size that I want for roughing them in. And if I plugged it in, it would go a lot faster, so we'll reach back over here and give it the old juice trick. Here we go. as always, I make it a point to push my pieces all the way through the saw and walk around to retrieve them. I don't like reaching across a hot blade that's running on there. So now we're going to take our longer one here. We're going to do the same thing. Doesn't have much of a hook or a curve to it, so we're good running it this way. And there we have our two long and short aprons ready to go. And we'll look down there and I can see I've got a pretty good hook here. So when it comes to running this through on my jointer, which is the first thing we're going to do, I'm going to take it over here to the joiner. That's the edge is going to be down. That's the edge is down. And these are 4/4 stock. Just means that they're an inch long. Or an inch thick rather, which all of your lumber is always sold by the 1/4 inch of thickness. So when I say 4/4, I just mean that it's inch thick. The other stuff we've got here is 8/4, so that's going to be 2 inches thick. And with the aprons, it doesn't so much matter how thick they end up. I would prefer they be at least 3/4, if not a little fatter, but I'm not going to take them down. If they clear at 7/8, I'm going to leave them at 7/8. If they get all the way down to 3/4, we'll leave them there. And as crooked as some of this is, we're going to lose a good bit, but we've got 1/4 inch of material to play with there. So I'm going to do that. We'll head over to the jointer next. We'll set up and joint the face of these, and we'll take them to the plane. Here we are back at our jointer. What I'm going to do is I'm going to take and do a face first, and then I'm going to run an edge as well. I've got my X on there because I know this board's twisted out a little bit this way, so that's going to be my part that's going to go down on it. And obviously I'm always going to use my push pads. And one of the first things I'm going to do though is get our dust collection up and running. As noisy as it is, it's worth having there. Push pads, always, always, always. Never operate a jointer on a face joint without them. We got our dust collected open up. We're going to fire it through. You can see there from our first pass, we're probably 90% clean. We're going to give it one more shot to make it perfect. Good on that one. Then we're going to take and do one of the edges that we've got piece of sapwood here will not be an issue when we're going to assemble this. I hope this side will be clear, but we're going to find out shortly. I'm going to run this over to the surface planer now, a thickness planer, all the way over here. Let's get that out of the way. What this is going to do is give us the opportunity to use this nice flat surface that we just created on our jointer and plane it down to a desired thickness. And here again, all I'm looking for is to have it clean on both sides and uniform thickness with all of them. So if it ends up being 3/4, that's great. If it's 7/8, that's great. Don't really care too much. This is a whole bunch louder than my jointer, so I'm going to go ahead and get those ear muffs out to protect my ears. So keep Benjamin happy that I kept my ears working. Let's open up that one. Let's close that one, open up that one. Let's open up here to where we got plenty of margin in there. And then we're going to go ahead and get these planed down. Whatever number of passes it takes to get the job done, we're going to do it. Pretty character in that walnut. Probably a little more than I anticipated initially. We'll deal with it. Surface on our opposite side through the joiner, so we turn it over. Now we're doing a rough side to get them all cleaned up on one side. Then we'll bring them back through and do the opposite side again. Good there. we've got these cleaned up. Let's find out how thick they ended up. There, right there. So our aprons are 13/16. That's not bad. That's right in the ballpark of what we wanted. So they're all cleaned up, and we've got them right there at 3 5/8 wide. That's adequate. I'm going to take them down to 3 1/2. So we've got our edge here that we jointed initially. And let's all of our jointed edges are facing that way. And we're right at just a little long of 3 1/2 there. So what we're going to do is I'm going to take these back over to our table saw, finish them to width, get these out the way. As I said earlier, when I'm done with my table saw, the last thing I always do is lower my blade below the top of the deck, pull my fence over it, just for safety. Bring this back up. We're going to bring our saw blade to the right height, which just gives me a couple teeth showing above the surface of the board. I'm going to set our final dimension width-wise right at 3 1/2. And we're going to fire these through, and we'll have them cut to widths and thickness. That this last one was just a touch narrower than the 3 1/2, so it didn't clean that edge up. So we're going to take another 1/8 of an inch off of all of these, set them right at 3 3/8, and we'll run them all back through again. Again, I want that uniformity, but I'm not real concerned about the end width dimension on it. As long as they end up uniform and all that, that's what really matters the most. That'll clean up now. Blade back out of the equation. Get this one out of the way. Pull our fence over to cover that for safety. And there we go. We've got our aprons for our table all set to go for thickness and width, and then our length is a rough number because we haven't really refined how we're going to deal with the length of our board just yet. So with that, I think I'm going to set up our router table and put a nice decorative bead on these. There, now we're back here at the router table. I'm going to put a 1/4 inch bead as a profile on the bottom outside of our apron. So I got my router out of my lift here just because it's easier to get to the blade that way. I'm going to loosen this up. Had a rabbiting blade in there for a second on a project. Pull this out. 1/2-inch shank on everything, which I like. I'm gonna drop this one in, and again, it's this really cool little bead mold here that we're gonna put on there. We'll set that into our collet. Always leaving a little bit of the shaft exposed there. Let's lock this down. Let's tighten this up. That'll work. Set this back down into our table. Get some of the debris out of there so it doesn't elevate our router lift above the top of the table. Set that into place. We're good there. This woodpecker table has this system for raising and lowering. There we go. That gets it up about where we want it. That's pretty close to the ballpark. We'll set that down there on the magnetic strip. We'll put our throat plate back in place. Set that back down here in its holder. And then we're going to take our scrap piece here and line up about where we want that cut to be. I've got to take this down a good bit because it's a little bit too high. Let's set it back up there, and obviously I'm doing all this with it very much unplugged. That ought to give us these, and that'll give us pretty close. What I've done is I've gone down a little bit below what I need it to be, and then I'm going to raise it up just a touch because I don't want any slack on the downside. I want it to be supported by putting it on the raising side of it to keep it in order. We might be just a touch tall there. Again, we're going to go back down just a little bit. That should get us in the ballpark, and then we're going to run a sample here just to see how we come out. And I'm going to take my scrap here and I'm going to hold it across the opening here in my router table, well, on both sides, and I'm just going to roll it back until I encounter the bearing that it's going to ride on. I want it to get just right to that bearing. Come on. Cooperation is mandatory. Right there's where we want to lock that down. And obviously we're going to plug it in. We're going to do a test run here to make sure that we're good height-wise and distance from the fence out. So let's grab our power source here. Let me run over here and grab the extension cord that'll get me over there. There we are. Let's grab our push pads here, and let's grab our ears again, just because that router table is a loud one. And we don't want those ears to get damaged any more than they already have been. So we're good here. See if we have action. We finally do, and then I went and turned it off. Okay. We're going to run this through. See how that comes out of there. I'd say we were pretty good there because that is absolutely perfect corner bead. That's exactly what we want. A real nice profile on the end on there. I don't know if you can see that a little better if I pull it up here, but we've got a really nice profile on that. That's the profile I want on the bottom of our aprons. So I've got these all sorted. And what I've done is I've taken our edge here that we've jointed up and is clean. The other one's clean. I'm looking at what side I want to be the outside. Looks like this is going to be the way it's going to go. So we're going to run this through there. Apron. This is going to be just to our outside. Apron. This is going to be our bottom and outside. We've got a little extra material to cut off. I'll get it supported on the outside. Down. You can see here, that end, the weight cantilevered it down off the bit and it messed up this last little bit down here. Fortunately, we've got about 4 inches extra on this so we can take that off of our length ultimately. Right here, we're going to do the same thing. That is going to make real nice aprons on our table. So when they're when our aprons are on the table, let's say this is our tabletop, this is our apron. When you see it, it'll sit there, it'll look basically like that. So that's just a nice decorative little profile on there, and it softens that edge a little bit, gives it a little accent line there. So right there, other than cutting the aprons to final length, which will happen only when I've gotten the actual top itself done, to make sure that my numbers there are right on the money, and then I can subtract the dimension that I want for overhang and the thickness of the legs, and I can cut these to length and attach them on there. So with that point of it, our aprons are done. So the next thing we're going to get into doing is we're going to figure out of this pile which of these pieces of wood want to be legs, and we'll process those and glue those up, because they're going to be probably 3.5 to 3 3/4 square, and we've got 8/4 material here, so we're going to have to glue those together to get to our ultimate size. So let me sort through this, and then we'll come back and look at making legs for our table. And we're back here, and what you can see that I've done is I've taken some of our 8/4 2-inch thick material and I've trimmed it down to make our legs from, and now we're just going to process it and get a face clean. We're not so much worried about the edge because we ripped them on the saw. We're going to get these planed down, jointed and planed, and ready to be run, or glued together rather. Let's open that up and get some suction here. So my forearm on my back hand is really in line with the fence on the joiner. So all my energy is going downstream to make sure I can push this through real easy. This one's pointing down to the deck and the fence holding it to the deck. Point that stance out for a reason. I have seen so many people try to run stuff through a jointer and they're standing here like this and trying to get it through. Well, this end is pointing straight that way. This one's mostly pointing that way. There's nothing pointing downstream. It makes it hard to do. So they're forcing it and trying to drag it through versus getting back behind here and having almost all of our energy go downstream with it. This way, it's easy to push through. When you're off on the side here, it's hard to push through. So you end up forcing it rather than finessing it. And whenever you do that, you're asking for trouble. And it will find you. The board will kick out. All kinds of things can happen that you don't want to have happen. So we're going to get these over here. Get ready to run those through the planer. And then we'll have our stock for our leg. And be able to glue those up and make leg blanks out of it. Let's open up our surface planer here. Again, this is 8/4 material. Lumber always being sold in the 1/4 inch in terms of thickness. So that just tells us that they're 2 inches thick. Get that in there. Bring this back down. Then run over here and turn on our dust collector again. That one, so all of our energy will be focused here. Get our ears back into the equation. Let's move this over a little bit to make it easier for you to see what we're doing here. Set these right on top of here, actually. Make them easier to access. And again, we're not looking for a specific thickness here. All we're looking to do is clean up that second side. We've got the first side cleaned up on the jointer. Now we're looking to clean up the opposite side on the planer. Run her through. Here, it's cleaning up real nice. One pass on each of these. all of our leg blanks are nice and clean. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to set up for gluing these together face to face like this. And we'll get 2 legs out of this set of blanks and 2 legs out of this set as well. So that'll take care of our leg issues. So when we come back, I'll show you how to get these set up and prepped and ready to glue together. We are back and ready to glue up our first leg blank. You can see I've got my pipe clamps ready to go. I've got my glue roller. I've marked just a line across here, random spacing, just to make sure that when I put it together, I don't get anything sliding back and forth, because these are only about 2 inches longer than they need to end up. So I'm pretty particular about making sure that they go together and stay lined up. So I'm going to take my glue roller here. And as is my wont, I always start on the side away from me. I don't want to be hanging over fresh glue if I don't have to. These glue rollers work real nice for getting the glue on there. You get them at Rockler, you get them at Woodcraft, whatever. Actually, I think we've got an affiliate link down there to find these, which is pretty handy for you. Always tight bond. Sometimes tight bond 3, sometimes tight bond 2. And you notice my glue is always coming out on this side of the roller, so it's rolling out this way. I always roll my glue on this way, pick it up, and go back and spread it. Some people will see them going back and forth both ways like that. I don't think that's an effective way to apply glue. So we've got a video that we did a couple weeks ago that we'll link to up here that'll show you a couple different ways of applying glue to your pieces. The biggest thing is you got to cover everything. I'm always in the habit, and have long been, of applying glue to both sides of a given glue surface, just because I want to make sure I've got more than adequate coverage. I don't want bare spots. Bare spots don't hold. So I'm going to get it all over everything. And yeah, I end up with a little squeeze out this way, but if I've got squeeze out coming all the way down the joint, then I know I've got a good joint that's got enough of the adhesive in there to make that thing stick together. And I've never had a glue joint fail when I've put glue on both sides of a joint. I've seen plenty of people have joint failure problems because they didn't put enough glue on their piece. So I'd much rather clean up too much than not have enough and risk a joint failure. Let's set our glue aside. Let's put these back face to face. Rub them up against each other a little bit. There, I've got a nice clean shot there. Good old everyday pipe clamps. Put it on there. Look at that squeeze out come up through that. I do like that. What I like to do also when I'm doing something that's this wide is I like to alternate my clamps top to bottom. And we're good there, we're good there. Go right on down the line here. Now I like to put a good bit of crank on them. I like them to really be tight. And yes, these are pipe clamps. Yes, it could damage the face of our leg blanks here, but ultimately I'm going to narrow them down anyway. So both of those surfaces will be milled a little bit further down. So any indentation that these pipe clamps are making will be taken off anyway when that surface is finally milled, so we won't have that as an issue at all. There we go. We might have to go get some more clamps here though. That's okay. We got enough clamps to occupy 2 or 3 shops. Okay, so let's go just a little more sideways like this so that clamp bar can be on that sawhorse to keep it from tipping over. There we go. That's a nice squeeze out line coming through there. We like that. And we're going to go here. And we got good squeeze out all the way to the top. I think we're in good shape right there. Now, question comes up often about what do you do with the excess squeeze out? Quite frankly, I normally just leave it there because I know that I'm going to run this over a jointer and through the planer again to get that down and get that cleaned off of there. You know, I could take a putty knife, and I have done, let this dehydrate, let it dry for 15-20 minutes. It kind of gels over and congeals a little bit, and then scrape it off. But I'm not going to worry about it because I know that I'm going to take this and I am going to surface that edge anyway. So now I'm going to look at what time it is. This went into clamps at 12:10. Just a good habit to get into, marking your time on it so you know when it went into clamps. Sometimes if you get in a hurry on a project, you want to make sure you've given it adequate time to create its bond and bond well. So I keep track of it. In this case, I'm not going to open these up until probably tomorrow. So they'll have a good day, if not a day and a half to set up. Let's check our squeeze out on the opposite side. Everything is real good there. So another thing that you'll notice is all of my handles are on one side of the glue up, and I want that there for the simple reason that I'm going to take this off of the sawhorses. I'm going to set it down here. It's just going to sit on the floor like that. If I've got all the handles on one side, it'll sit there nice and easy. If I rotate a few and I've got a long stem sticking out in any one of those areas, well, then it's not going to sit there the way I want it to. So it's easier just to go ahead and set the handles all to one side. Makes it easier to stand it up and store it for later on. So I'm going to get on to gluing up this next one, and then we'll have our leg blanks all done and ready to go. Our legs have had enough time in clamps to, I will consider them dried. So we're going to take these out of clamps this morning, show you how to clean up the glue squeeze out that's left on here. Let's put this over like that so it won't do that again. We'll put the clamps all right down here on our sawhorses quick. We've got two sets of legs already glued up. Leg blanks. And then what we're going to do is we're going to take these and run them through the jointer to get this dried on glue off of one face, and then we'll run them through the planer to get rid of the rest of it. And we'll get rid of this one lastly, and we'll have it all ready to go. Alright, we've got a good bit of squeeze out on the top side here and a good bit on the bottom as well. So we're going to run these through the jointer over here and get that edge cleaned up. Real straightforward here. Let's turn on the dust collector because that jointer puts out a good bit of sawdust. Let's open up. That up. Now with that glue on that face like that, we've got to make certain that we're holding this face nice and tight up against our fence. We get a 90-degree face there. What we should get initially push pads here, make this a little easier to maneuver through here. nice and clean. Then we'll run it over to the surface planer to get the other side to match that up. So if we measure this, we're going to find out that we're quite a bit thicker than we are wide. So our width here looks to be about 3 5/8. Thickness this way ends up being 3 7/8. We're going to have to plane that down a little bit to get that square. And as long as it ends up somewhere in the neighborhood of 3 1/2 inches square, that's about what we want for our leg size. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to get the camera repositioned over here, get it over next to the planer, and you'll be able to watch us get that cut down. Okay, at this point, I've gotten both of our leg blanks out of clamps and jointed one face to get it cleaned up. We're going to shut that one down. We're going to open this one up to make sure we've got good extraction on our jointer, or our planer rather. We're going to open this up and plane these down to the point where they're perfectly square. That ought to get us pretty close. I like to set it in there about halfway through and then bring the surface planer up to meet with it. Let's put our ears on here again because this is obnoxiously loud. Let's take it through. Look at how nice that cleans that up on there. Takes that smooth surface right back down to nice, fresh and flat. These are going to be heavy, heavy legs. 3 1/2 by 3 1/2. Solid walnut. Dimension where we want it, and then we'll switch to the other side, get them cleaned down, and then ultimately what you see us do is we'll rotate these from a face to a face to get it to the point where it's perfectly square. We're about a 1/4 inch different at this point, so we'll have to work on getting the one dimension down, then we'll catch up to the other one. more pass this dimension, getting caught up to the opposite dimension. Tabletop surface ending up at 30 inches off across above the floor. Now with the leg blanks that we've just run through the planer, got them down to 3.5 inches each side. I want to cut them to length. Our top's going to be 1.5 inches thick. We want the top of the table to be 30 inches off the deck, so we're going to cut these right down to 28.5. And I've got 60 there, so I've got a little room to play with, so I'm going to cut them. Make sure I've got enough there. How I want to work this to get these to be consistent thickness-wise, let's get that out there, is I'm going to set up a stop here on the saw. I'll flip up my end stock here. Now I'm simply going to lock the blade down, and then I'm going to take my tape measure, pull it across here, right to where that blade is, right on the fence. I'm going to pull my stop up here until it shows us right at 28.5. Lock that down, and then they'll all be exactly the same when I get them done. So I'm going to take this up. That's working. The first thing I've got to do, obviously, is I've got to establish a perfectly square end here on our leg blank. So I want to set that in there, cut that down first. There we go. Establishes that, then we can pull it out right to our stop here. And let's mark this so we know that we're pretty certain with our measurement there. 28.5 right there. That's within about a 1/16, so we're going to call that plenty close enough. get our other stop into the equation here so we don't have all this leg cantilevered out over the edge of our saw. Can go anywhere. There's 28.5. Here we go. And right there we are. Yeah, we're right on the money. On the money, close enough. Now, I'm going to do that the same way with the other blank that we've got. So we'll end up with 4 legs that are perfectly identical in terms of their length and their dimensions on both sides, perfectly square. And then I'm going to show you how to set up a taper jig because we want to have what's called a 2 inside tapered leg. So if these are the insides of the table leg here, we're going to taper these down a little bit just to give them a little bit of a different dimension. We'll show you how to set up a jig to do that, and we'll probably cut those on the bandsaw. Now I have my tapering fixture out that I made, simple piece of plywood, a couple pieces of plywood as stops for it. What I want to do is I want this taper to come down about 5 inches from the top of my leg where it's going to start. So I'm going to get this down here. I'm just going to mark that as about 5 inches. And I'm doing this with a Sharpie again just so you can see it. And we're going to mark that off there and make that real visible. And then I'm going to go down here to my end. And when I'm tapering a leg, I'd like to take about 1/3 of the dimension off. And I've got 3 and right about 1/2 there. So I'm going to go here to about 1 inch and 1/8. Somewhere close to that. It doesn't have to be perfect, but just in the ballpark. I'm going to mark that real well so you can see that. And the way I set this fixture up is I'm going to take my line coming down here off the side. We'll put my stop down here on the end. So being that this is the edge that's going to be cut next to it, I want that line coming down to intersect the face of the fixture here. So that way when I'm running this through, my start on my cut will be right on that line. And I went down to the opposite end down here and I marked over, and I have this line again right up to the edge of our board here. So I know that when I'm cutting through, my line's going to come right down through there. Now, when I go over to set up my bandsaw, I've got about 8 3/8 there. So we'll set that up for about 8 1/2. Sometimes I will stack scraps on top of here and put toggle clamps down here to hold it in place. But when I've run this through the bandsaw in the past, I have found that as long as I'm putting my stop here on the far end and pushing it through, just the tension coming of the blade coming through holds it up nice and tight to that stop. And then on the side, I can push it into my fence here. So let's go and get the bandsaw set up again for right at 8 1/2 inches. And right there is our 8 1/2 mark. That's what we need, and we need to have our guide set up at least 4 inches, so 4 inches will pass under there. That'll give us about 1/4 inch of margin to play with. And what I'm done here is I've got my marks that we put on earlier. I got my top mark here. That face is going to come off. This face is going to come off. So what I want to do is I want this face to come off first. And then when I turn it half a turn, I've still got a square back here to run onto my jig. And I can take this face off. So it's important that you run them in that order. Again, this face is the first face that's facing out. That's going to get cut off. Then when I turn it, I've still got flat surfaces on both my bottoms to sit on my fence and take this one off. So let's show you how we're going to do that with our first one. Over here to the bandsaw, we've got our blade set up. We're going to clear the guides here. Let's take that up just a touch more. Give us just a little bit more margin. And we'll of course grab our ears because I like to protect those. And here we go. 2 inside tapers cut on a bandsaw with a tapering jig. And the facing is correct. That face is coming off. And when you're doing this on your bandsaw, of course, you have to make sure you've got a good blade. The saw needs to be adjusted right so you'll get a nice clean cut of that face. It tends to be almost like a big resaw. Things get nice and close. That comes out nice and even on our end here. There we go. We're videoing Joe. My buddy Joe just come in to do a project this morning, and let me show you. We'll turn that over. We've got our other side that's marked here. We'll slice that off. And we'll have a nice walnut leg with 2 tapers on the inside and the leg. You notice we got a good bit of walnut sawdust coming up here. That always happens on the bandsaw. There, our fixture's in place. Knock that off. And you'll see from this that we've got a taper on this inside and this inside, and they came out within about 1/4 of an inch, the same of each other. So there we have 2 inside tapers on our legs. We'll do that with all 4 of them, and then I'll show you what we're going to do. We'll take them over to the jointer, clean up that edge, and then they'll be ready for sanding and routing. So we'll show you how to do that when we get back after I've done the other 3. So now, continuing on our dining room table, I've got 5 pieces of 8/4 walnut here that are anywhere from 8 to 10 inches wide. They're 2 inches thick, 8/4. I'm going to take them down to about 1 inch and 9/16. I'm going to run them one at a time. I would normally run them all in sequence, so I'm going to run them one at a time to get them in the ballpark of what I want. And then when I get to the end, I'll run them all in sequence to make sure they all end up exactly the same thickness. I was going to do the protect the ear thing here to get them started. So it's going to be a whole lot of back and forth. I'll show you a good bit of it, and then we'll take a break from it and show you how we're doing it. Fortunately, these have been run through a surface planer at the mill where I picked them up. So we've got at least one side that's pretty flat on them and ready to go. There we are. This is going to take a good while to get these cleaned down to 1 5/8. Ultimately, we're going to end up 1 1/2 inches. set this up. That'll tell me when I'm down to the dimension that I need. inches distance. That's what we're going to be doing until I get through all 5 of these pieces. And then we'll come back at the end and show you running them all in sequence to make sure they're all the same thickness dimension. There we have all of our 5 pieces for our walnut tabletop cut down on the planer to 1 9/16. Ultimately, I want to get to 1.5 inches. I ran them all singly, just to save myself a whole lot of walking and carrying them around the shop. But now that I've got them all down to this, I'm going to run them all through at the last setting to get them down to a uniform thickness. And one of the things that you'll notice is on every pass, I was turning the boards over, taking a little bit off of each side with every successive pass. I do that because if there's any tension in the lumber at all, and I take all of the material off of one side, maybe that tension goes away on that side and it tends to want to pull it out of flat, pulling it the other way. So I alternate them to take tension equally off both sides just to give them a better chance of staying flatter longer. So that's why I do that. I've got our last setup here on the planer. I'm going to fire it up and run these through the last time. Let me get our dust collector running here. And we'll make these go for the last pass through. And we're going to set these on some sawhorses that are directly on the back side of the shop here. We're going to protect our ears. We're going to fire this up, run them through for that last pass. That way they'll all end up with uniformity of thickness. Here we go. We're going to set up a pretty light pass on the last one. It'll be somewhere close to the 1.5 inches. If it's a little thicker, fine. If it's a little thinner, that's fine as well. Minimize the amount of snipe that's going to happen. step in the process here with our 8/4 walnut tabletop. The mill that I got it all from ran it through a straight line rip machine, big table saw with self-feeding and all this. So one edge of it has been cut nice and straight, which is good, but I'm still going to run it over a joiner to do that last finished edge before I run it through the table saw to get to our thickness. So let's reposition this and we'll show you how we're going to run everything through the planer, or through the joiner rather. We've got it planed down, we've got our thickness established. That's what happens when you, from Cammy, the camera robot. And there we are, that'll work well. We're going to close off the dust collector over here on the planer. Focus all of our dust collecting on our jointer. I have 3 main lines that go through the shop here, and what machine I'm working on determines which lane is open. So I've got the jointer open and the other 2 are closed up, so all of my suction energy is focused here on the jointer. So let's go ahead and run these through. We'll take the edge that was cut on the straight line rip machine at the mill, and we're just going to clean it up to make sure we've got a perfectly straight edge that we can use to run them on our table saw to get our ripping of the boards down to width. Pushing it over and bringing it back every other pass. And I managed to forget to turn on the dust collector, so now my joinery is full of walnut dust. I'll have to clean that out again later. ready to be ripped. That jointed edge will run up against our table saw fence to help us get these to our final width dimension. So with that, I'm going to take a little break. When we come back, we're going to determine what width we need all these to be and make our cuts to get to the total width of our tabletop. We'll do that on the table saw, and we'll show you that when I come back. And if you'll notice, back behind me here, I have a sliding glass door here in the shop. I had a friend come over one time and thought he was being real helpful, and he grabbed the board as it was coming out of the saw, after having been instructed specifically not to do that. And it caused a kickback, and that board went right through that sliding glass door. Not fun. Okay, we've got the last two at 8 inches, so let's cut those again. Right up here at 8 inches, keep going. Let's come back off the back side to extract my cut-off pieces. One more at 8 inches and then we'll have it. Driving knife, put it on the downside here. It helps hold that board nice and tight to that fence. And there we go. Pieces are cut to width. I go back over here and shut off our dust collector. Then I'm going to lay these out on the workbench to put them in the orientation that I want, and then we'll determine how much extra dimension that we might have to take off in a little bit. So we'll see you shortly. Be right back. I have all of our top pieces laid out across my workbench now. One of the things that I did, that I like to do on all my cases, is I'll look at the grain ring or the growth ring orientation, and I always mark with an O the ones that are basically facing up. So the tree was round this way and round this way. The other ones are round the opposite way. I like to alternate them, you know, a down and up and a down and up and a down and up. Just because trees are living things and they like to move, and they'll typically move opposite of the direction of the growth rings. So if it's open like this and down, it's going to want to go open this way. If I alternate them, you know, word has it that it'll prevent too much movement in them, and movement in one direction will countermand movement in another direction. So I like to do that. Now, I have a situation where we need to end up at 40 inches wide, and we're at 46 1/4 now. So I've got a little margin for taking some extra off of these. These 3 boards are 8 inches. These 2 here are 11. So I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to take about 2.5 inches off of these boards that are 11 inches wide, and that'll get me down to 5 off that. That'll get me down to 41. That'll give me enough margin for final jointing of edges. So I'm going to decide here which of these edges I want to take off. If I want to take off 2.5 here, where does that get me? About there. So I'm going to go with this side. I'm going to mark it as minus 2.5. Then I'm going to go to this longer one here. I like the grain right here better than I do on this side. So let's take this. Let's knock 2.5 off of this side. Minus 2.5. So I'll still have some margin for error there. So if I take 11, and if I knock off 2.5, I've got 8.5 inch boards there. So I can set my table saw up to cut right at 8.5. That'll knock off 2.5 inches off of there. 11, 10, 9, 8.5 will get me to right there. So if I mark those at 8.5 on my table saw, I can knock that off. I'm going to do that quick. I'll be right back. There, I've got our pieces pretty much cut to the final width that they're going to be. The way I like to mark things out for my glue ups, I know that this tabletop has to end up at 72 inches in length, and I'm pretty tight here. We're about 72.5, 72 3/4, so it's pretty critical that I line the end up here real well. Half of 72 is going to be 36 and change, so I'm going to put a tick mark there. What I like to do is I like to mark my center of my table, and this is mostly just so I kind of know where I'm going with stuff. So I'll put a mark across here, and when I'm lining this up for the glue up, I'll make sure that that line is nice and square. And of course I moved it all out of whack. That was real good, Tim. Good job there. Let's move it back into whack. This end is lined up perfectly straight. And it keeps wanting to move like that, so I'm going to give it an attitude adjustment so it can't move. I'm going to go back over here and grab a nice long clamp. And I'm going to clamp the whole thing together so it cannot continue to do that. I sure do like nice long quick clamps, quick grips. These are great. This end is all lined up real nice. I've got our mark here. And I would normally not do this in Sharpie, but I want you to be able to see it. I know my end there is going to be right at the end. So I'm going to go out here, mark this at right at the end at 36, and I'll line out here to note where the end of our tabletop will ultimately be. And there's a reason for that, actually. And it's a pretty legitimate reason. I want to know where my tabletop is going to end. And I want my orientation to be known. So I'll put a good carpenter's triangle on here. That way, once I take this apart to joint these edges for the final time, I'll know that orientation. I won't have to guess at it. I won't have to recalculate it. So I'm going to go out here. I'm going to come in about 5 inches from the end of that table. And that's where my biscuits are going to go in this. I'm going to mark my biscuit joints, spots like this. I do that because the slot that you cut with a biscuit is going to be about 3 1/4 inches long. Knowing where my end is, I want to be well inside that, so when I cut this end off nice and straight, I don't want to run into a biscuit pocket and have that showing. I'm going to put biscuits on the center line here. I'm going to come in here about that far and about that far and do another set of biscuits. And I simply mark those with my marker across here like this, making sure they're perfectly straight across from each other on that joint line. And again, I would normally do this in pencil, but I wanted you to be able to see it, and I know what my sanding capabilities are, so I'll sand all those marks off in a bit. That looks about right. We'll come in again 5 inches from this side and mark those biscuits the same way. Boy, those lines are coming up so nice from just running them on the table saw. And once I on the joiner there, it's hard to see where the joint lines actually are, which is nice. You kind of want it that way. I'm going to come in there and do another one about there. And I'm not too particular about where I'm placing these. I just know that I want them to be spaced relatively uniformly apart, but I don't care if it's 8 or 10 inches. And so long as they're there. And what those are really going to serve to do, purpose-wise, is they control elevation. The biscuit fits into that slot that I'll show you how to cut here in a second, but it keeps them from going up and down. So ultimately, when I use the top, as I always do for my reference surface on my biscuit cutter, all my tops end up being very, very uniformly together on the very top of the table. So when it comes to sanding it down, it comes in real nice and flat. The last thing I'll do here is, normally on my center line, I'm going to mark one side of a joint is in, one side is out. One side is in, one is out. Where is this one? This side is in, that side's out. Where is this one? This side is in, this side is out. Why I do that is, that tells me when I go to my jointer, because the last thing I'll do before I do a glue up and before I cut my biscuit slots, I'll take this over to the jointer and give it one last shot to the jointer. And the in just means that this face of that particular joint is going to be in toward the fence. And on this particular one, the opposite side of that joint, it's going to be outside, away from the fence. That way, if there's any deviation from perfect 90 degrees, when I joint it, those two will offset each other. So it's not going to end up with a built-in bow in it. It's going to end up perfectly flat. So I'll in and out all those all the way down the line before I put my biscuit slots in and before I get it cut up. So the next thing I'm going to do is going to run those over to the biscuit, or over to my jointer, and joint them. And why I do opposites of each side of every board, out on this one, in on this one, is when I get it over there, if I'm inside on one, this side here is into the fence and this side needs to be out, all I got to do is go like that. I don't have to switch the whole board. If I did them in and in, I'd have to switch the whole board long ways, end to end to get it to go through. And that means picking it up and going all the end. That's a whole lot more difficult than simply flopping it over on one side to the other. Now these joints are really good already. Without any glue or clamp pressure and glue, I can see that I have really good joints over there. So I'm going to wander over to the jointer. I'm going to run these and get my in and outs, as I call them, done on it. And then those joints should line up perfectly straight and have a nice glue joint that's going to be just about invisible. So let's go over here to the jointer and show you how we're going to do that real quick. Open up our dust collection. That's open, and you're there. I'm going to fire up the dust collector here. Inside on this joint. Now I'm going to do the out half of that same joint. So my outside, this face is going to be out away from the fence. Something that's critical when you're laying these back down is don't lay one board on top of another and abrade those edges against each other, because it'll mess up your joint and make it not look as good. We grab a couple clamps here. I like to test these joints after I have run them over the jointer, just to make sure that they're going to pull up nice and clean. And boy, with just squeeze clamp pressure, that joint is completely gone. I can't even see where it is. It blends together so well. And the way you can tell there's even two pieces of lumber there is the fact that the grain patterns are a little different. So with just a little bit of pressure on there, that joint completely goes away, not visible. And that's what we like to see. I'll do that all the way down the line with these, joining the faces in and out. I'll test them to make sure that they're spot on the money. And then we'll come back and run the biscuits in there. Show you how to do that. We're at the point today where we're going to do some biscuit joinery here in the shop. So we're going to be talking about biscuits. I'm not talking biscuits and gravy, because if we wanted that, we'd go upstairs to my honey because she makes the best. And then our friends John and Judy at church do a good job of it too. But we're talking about biscuit jointery today. And what we're going to be doing is putting this type of biscuit between all the joints on our tabletop here. This is a biscuit cutter. This is what's going to cut that slot form. And what that's going to do is it's going to align the reference surface, which is going to be the top of our board. It's going to align that with our biscuits, are holding it in the alignment so that when we put it together, we'll have a nice clean flat surface on the front. So this is our biscuit cutter, slot cutter. We're going to open up our fence here. Get that at 90 degrees. And then you'll see that there's a little red indicator here on the side of the tool, and that basically indicates where in the side of our board that this slot's going to be cut. Being that we've got 1.5 inch thick stock here, I want that to be pretty close to the middle of it. So we're going to open this up, release the lock. We're going to raise that fence up a good bit here. And there's a little gauge here on the side that shows us, so we're going to put it right at about 3/4 inch. And when I look down here, that's going to get our slot centered right in the middle of our board down here. And that's a good thing. Last time we were together, we marked all the slots here on our board. So these indicators here are where our biscuits are going to go. And they correspond to that same mark on the other side of the same joint. I want those biscuit slots to be directly across from each other. And what they're going to do is they're going to provide an opportunity for this biscuit to sit in here. And there's going to be a little bit of lateral motion that we can exercise in there to push the boards basically side to side. We want that, but they've got to be pretty close to aligned here so we can have that motion and have that work. What I'm going to do is I'm going to plug this in. I'm going to cut all these, and then I've got them set up over here with our assembly table. I'm going to set them all here, put them in the clamps over here, and then we'll get on to doing the glue up and making all that work. So let's grab our extension cord here. Let's go that way. We got to plug this in. That makes it go a whole lot faster. We're ready to go there. Let's tie these two ends together so it'll do what it needs to do. And with this biscuit cutter, the slot cutter, basically it is a blade that comes out of the face of our cutter here. We're using this as our reference down onto the top of our board, and we'll fire it up and we'll slide it in there. It'll make that cut. We'll slide it back out and move on to the next one. So we are going to go all the way down here. We've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 in each of our boards, and we'll set this here. I like to kind of come at it from an angle down and engage the fence to the edge of our board near the bottom, and then slide it up here, and then have our fence here, which is our reference point, which is always on the top. Get that in there and hold that nice and tight. And then the key to really succeeding with biscuit joints is to take it easy. Let the saw do the work. I've seen too many people jam it in there real quick like they're in some kind of a hurry. They can't be patient about it. And what sometimes will happen, if you do that, it will grab versus cut, and it'll pull this thing right up and out of there. And when it does that, invariably it pulls it up at an angle, and then your cut will come right through the top of your board, and then you're in a situation where you've got to go back and fix that or start over with that piece. So we're going to fire this up. It is a little noisy, but we'll get through it. So here we go with our first one. Nice and easy. Let's set that aside, and we'll show you what we've got here. These nice little slots all the way down our board. And like I said before, this biscuit is going to slide right in there and provide a measure of control of our vertical side here with these joints. And they're a little bit loose in there, and that's okay. They're generally made out of a European beech, and they're very much dehydrated and compressed. And what'll happen is when we put our glue onto this face, it'll get down into that slot, and that water, which is what the glue is based on, will get into this biscuit, and it'll swell it, it'll expand it, and it'll fill that joint and make that real tight in there. So that's why you keep your biscuits locked in an airtight container until you need to use them, because we don't want them to swell ahead of time. Now we've got this. This is our far side, so we're going to set this right over here on our clamps that are all ready to go. And this is our next one. So we're going to come back and cut those on both sides. Here we go. Part of what helps this be a successful process is I'm holding down on this fence here real tight. What I don't want to do is I don't want to have the biscuit, I don't want to be pulling it up in the back or pushing it down in the back. I want that biscuit to go into that face at a perfect 90 degrees. I don't want it coming at an angle that'll pull our surfaces apart. Now, here's a good reason why we did our carpenter's triangle on there, because I'm having to change the orientation of these and get them over there and put them into our clamps. So with our carpenter's triangle on there, I'll know instantly where this one's got to go in the process. And you'll see we had to go end for end of that to get to the other side here. We're going to cut this one and take it over to our clamps. When you put your slot cutter down on a bench, put it quite a ways from the edge, because you don't want to have that get pulled off of your bench by tripping on the cord or something like that and having it fall on the ground. And there you can see our carpenter's triangle is putting that one right back in the position that we need it to be in. This is the next one. And we're just going to keep going through these until we get them all cut. Not a process that takes too long. Flip that over and do the other side, being careful not to have one board abrade the edge of another board. And something else that you'll see on these biscuit joiners, there's usually a catch bag for the sawdust that can be attached on there. I generally don't, because they tend to get clogged up pretty quick, and when it clogs up, it'll clog up this exhaust port here, and then you'll have to take the bottom plate off to get that cleared. I could probably hook it up to my dust collector from my random orbit disc sander, but I don't. I just get the old broom out and let her eat, clean her up. Okay, back over here to our assembly table, and right back there in order again. Let's do this one. Going to be a heavy table. A lot of weight here. I'm going to leave this one over here because I'm going to show you how to dry fit these in a second, just to give a test on where our biscuit slots have all ended up to make sure everything's going to align real nice. I always like to dry fit at least one of the boards in the process to make sure that all my settings are good. And last one. And you'll notice that sometimes I turn the machine off between slots, and when I move it over and start it up again, it doesn't matter if you start it up on every one or if you leave it running, because ultimately when it's not being projected into the wood, the blade stays inside the case, so it's not putting yourself in harm's way. There we go. Now we've got this one. Has to go here in terms of the order of assembly. What I'm going to do is I'm going to stand this up. I'm going to feed biscuits into all these slots, just to give you a better illustration of how it handles the vertical component for us. And some of these are pretty tight, so some of these have been out in the elements with the lid off for too long. So when it gets to be that way, sometimes you gotta get a hammer and smack them into place to force that cooperation. If they get to be a little tight like that, I generally, as you just saw, pitch them and get rid of them. Okay. Now when we set this down with our lines all in order, we'll pull that together. Nice and snug like that. Let me see. I don't have a clamp down there long enough to pull those together. Pull that together, and what that does is now this surface and this surface are perfectly aligned. There's no movement up and down here, so they're lined up real well, and that just makes it a ton easier when it goes to sanding these for the last time. You know, I've got my planer grooves on here, marks with my planer, but the elevation up and down is right smack on the money, right where that needs to be. So with that, we're good. We know that our joints are good. When we go to glue these together, we're going to make sure that our center line here is lined up on every one of our boards to get our orientation correct. And of course, today is the day it decides it doesn't want to come apart real easy. A couple of those biscuits are pretty tight in there, so we'll take these back out. And when it does that and they get stuck in there and don't want to cooperate, there's an easy solution to that as well. Go over here and grab a chisel off the bench, set it down in there with the bevel down. You can jam it into the end of that biscuit, wedge it in there, and just rock it up out of there. Real easy to do. Got a tight one here. We're going to do the same thing. Just rock that up and pry it right up out of there. Our biscuit back in our dog holes. And that's our last board. This is the one before it. And there we have biscuits cut in all of our boards. And they're here and in order. So ultimately, the next thing we're going to do is get our glue out and be able to glue this. And this is a 1, 2, 3, 4 joints. Yeah, we're going to do this in one solid glue. Do it one time and put them all together because we can get glue on there. It was quick enough to make that work. And we've got the clamps underneath. We'll get clamps for the top. Then we go get my glue and stuff ready to go. We'll take a short break. We'll be right back to glue this up. We are ready for gluing. What I'm going to do is, you'll notice I took all the boards and I piled them up on here. It just makes it easier if I have them sitting here like this to put the glue on this board, lay it down onto our clamp bed, slide it over. That way I don't have to be reaching over everything and reaching over wet glue, which of course I don't like to do. So I'm going to take our little roller here. And this is just my preferred way of doing it. It's got the roller here. It's got the glue coming out of the one point here. Roll it over the top like this. It spreads it nice and even. And I get enough on there to do all of it down the line. There's enough that'll slide down into those biscuit slots to give a little bit of glue for them. And one thing you'll notice is my glue is coming out on this side. That's always the direction I roll it in. I'm not going to have my glue come out here, roll it on this way, and roll it back off that way. I just like to do them in one direction. Then we're going to take enough of these and slide them down in there real good before I push it away. And yeah, I poured my biscuits all out on the table here to count how many that I had because I've got 4 slots here at 7 biscuits each. I needed to make sure I had 28 biscuits in the can so we wouldn't run out while we're in this process. I'm going to set this down. That one goes all the way over to the other side. This is the side that mates to it, so we'll get the glue on there as well. And when you get this glue rolling on there, you don't have time to dilly-dally around. You kind of got to get onto it. I guess the open time on type bond 2 like this is somewhere in the neighborhood of 10 to 12 minutes. So we like to try Try to come in under that time if we can. I'm going to turn this over, set it down on the other side, get the glue going on this side because I always put glue on both sides of a joint to make sure that I've got adequate coverage. One thing I have found is that dry spots where there is no glue, it doesn't hold together. You got to have the glue on there. Let the glue do its work. And this side is the one that's kind of facing me this way. So I'm going to put my biscuits there. That was pretty tight. That one went in well. Three more on this one. It's okay to get them when they're pretty close to each other. They're not touching each other just yet. Slide this one up like this. I always make it a point to put the biscuits on the side of the joint that faces me. There's nothing worse than going ahead and get your glue on there, get your biscuits all in the slots, and start going to push it together, only to find out that you've put biscuits on both sides of a single joint. You got to go back and take them apart, which is not necessarily an easy thing because once they get the glue on there, they tend to like to stay. Pretty difficult to get them out. And you'll notice we're working along pretty quick here. Getting glue down on everything. Grab a handful of biscuits again. Some of these are pretty tight, just because they've been exposed to relative humidity in the environment. Then we're doing pretty good there. Let's get some of this out of the way. Get those pushed together to start. That's pretty good. That way they're directed in there. When I go to tighten my clamps up, they'll be there and ready to go. All right, two more joints real quick, and we'll have it. This is typically probably an advisable thing to do would be to have help with this. But Benjamin is in school today, so he's not able to be here as my assistant, so we're doing it by myself. And I've done enough of these to where it's almost second nature, so I can get through them pretty quick. With good fortune, it'll come together nice and easy. Another thing to be mindful of too is make sure that your glue bottle is real close to full when you get started. There's nothing worse than getting most of the way through doing a glue up to find out that you're out of glue and you got to go get your gallon of glue that you buy and refill your glue bottle. That takes precious time away that you really do not have. There, that's the last of our biscuits. Going down. Line that up. Let's get this one out of the way. Get that lined up. Get it started. And then let's get the glue on our last edge here. The last of our biscuits are in. Let's get our last glue on here. Nice long even strokes will get that glue spread out just like we want it. And there we go. Put a little tension on this. Make sure they're all starting well and coming together like we want them to. And you notice that our center line here that we marked out is coming together real nice, which is what we want to have happen. You'll also notice that I don't have any culls on either side of this. The reason for that is I'm about an inch longer on a piece here than we really need to be. So I'm going to cut a little bit off of each side. So I wasn't too concerned about padding the clamps. Not really a necessity in this case. Boy, those are coming together real nice. Starting to get some squeeze out there. Let's get this last one here on the end in place. And yeah, I might have put those two clamps a little closer together, but that's okay. Squeeze out coming up off of each one. And you'll notice that we've got our clamps alternating top and bottom. There's that coming together, not as well as I'd like it to. Obviously one of our biscuits is swollen and is causing us a little bit of angst right there. But with enough clamp pressure, we can certainly compress that problem biscuit and get it to do what we want it to do. There, pull it up now. Cooperation is mandatory. Pull that up tight, and you'll see we've got real good squeeze out coming on all of our joints here. That's what we like to see. Enough glue in there so they'll come out, squeeze out, and come together real nice. Pull up our clamp here. Let's get this last one on. Our alignment vertically here is real good. And you'll notice back here on the jointer behind me that I put a bunch of F-clamps back there, just in case one of these didn't line up real good and needed to be convinced that it was going to. Real good, real good. Some people say all you want to do is get the glue to squeeze out, and that's tight enough, but I like to get them probably too tight. That's just me. I don't think there's such a thing as making them too tight. We're not humanly powerful enough to get them too tight. Squeeze it out of there. Okay, we've got all of our clamps in place. We've got good squeeze up all the way down the line. All the joints are lining up really good in terms of up and down this way, the vertical alignment, real good. I'm liking that. And I'm going to check the time here, it being about 9:20. I'm going to mark that just out of habit. I marked my time on there so I know when they went into clamps. I know that I want a minimum of a couple hours of clamp pressure on these, so I'm going to leave them sit there that long. But in the event that I had to get it out of clamps for some reason to expedite the process, I would know when it went in, so I know what my minimum was in terms of when I could take it out. So that is what we do with clamping up our stuff. That went real well. I will let this dry. I'll let it dry for probably half hour, and this squeeze out glue will glaze over, and I'll be able to come in with a sharp putty knife and scrape that excess off. Or if I let it dry, completely, because I'm going to let this sit till probably later this afternoon, I'll come in with a scraper plane and I'll scrape them off, or I've got a number 80 Stanley cabinet scraper that I could scrape that off with. Ultimately, I don't want to have to sand it off. I want to scrape it all off. And then lastly, the glue on the glue bottle, particularly on the roller here, make sure you wash that out real good, because that's a bit of a porous roller on there, and you don't want that glue to dry on there, because once it dries on there, it tends to want to stay on there. So you want to take that up and get it to the sink, get the excess glue off of it. We're going to put all of our biscuits back in the jar here and keep them dry. And that is all it takes to do a glue up on a great big tabletop. So we're going to take a little break here and let this do its thing, and let that glue create its bond and set up real well. And later this afternoon we'll come back, we'll take it out of clamps, we'll clean up the glue that's on there, and then we'll get our cut to length going on, and we'll get to processing this, turning it into a table. There we go. We'll be back shortly. Right there we are. We've done 4 quadrants, 80 grit sandpaper going with the grain, finishing up going across the grain. Now we're ready to do the whole thing exactly the same way again. Only this time we're going to make those peaks and valleys that much shallower and the scratches that much smaller by going with our 120 grit. You'll notice we had that marked on there. 120, very good. So off we go again. We're going to do exactly the same thing, going with the grain, then going across the grain. 120, then we'll switch to 180, and then we'll show you the water pop trick after the 180, and to get it just that much smoother. So here we go with our 120 grit. And this generally takes a little less time than the 80 grit. Not so much stuff to take off in terms of our differences in elevation between one board and another, minimal as they are. And we're not having to sand through and take our time to sand off the marks that we use to designate where our biscuits are going to be. Our center line, our carpenter's triangle. Roll through it. You can feel a big difference. Big difference in there. With that, I do believe it's time to take a little break and take a little pause for the cause. I'll be back to finish the 120. I'm going to switch to 180. When we get done with that 180, we'll come back and show you how to do the water pop trick on this, just to get that extra little touch of smooth to the whole thing. So stay with us, and if you got comments on how we're sanding this, leave them down below. We'll be back in a little bit after we've got these next 2 grits of sandpaper done. There, that takes care of our 180 grit sandpaper. So now, teach you another little trick here. One of the last things I like to always do, particularly on a big tabletop like this, is I'll take it down to my last grit on my sanding, and then I'm going to take a damp rag, not wet, a damp cloth, and I'm going to water pop the grain. Simply means I'm going to wipe it down with a damp cloth, and all those fibers on the very top of the piece here are going to expand a little bit with that water getting to them, swell them up a little bit, and some of the little microfibers that might stand up are going to kind of do their thing and stand up, and then I'll go back and sand it again. That way, when I get to putting my finish on, that little pop has already taken place, so it won't mess up my finish. I won't have to sand the finish near as much. So it's a real simple process. I'm going to get my rag here a little wet, wipe that up, and I'm just going to lightly go over it. And as I said, I'm not looking to get it wet per se. I just want it damp. And then, of course, I'll put the fan on it, let that dry a little bit. And it'll just swell that grain a little bit, and you'll really be able to tell the feel of it when you're when it dries out. You'll be able to tell those little fuzzies sticking up on there, and those just little bits of grain popping up a little bit. Just when you go back and shear those off with that last final round of sanding, it really gets everything super smooth, and it just lends itself to a better finish on your product. Smoother finish when you're doing it. It doesn't burnish the grain, so the pores don't end up closed up all the way. It'll take a stain if you're going to put a stain on. It just, another little detail that makes your end product just that much smoother. If smooth is what you like, it's the way to do it. So here we go, we're almost done. And it kind of gives you a preview too of what it's going to look like when you get a clear coat finish on it. This one's going to be cleared with probably a lacquer finish that's going to get on it. So that gives you a little bit of a preview of what it's going to look like. There we go. That's all we need to do. It's called water popping the grain. Fresh out of your drinking cup. That's going to dry. And it'll probably take it, 15-20 minutes to dry. And then I'll go back over with the 180 again, and then this surface will be completed. I won't have to do any more sanding on this one. It'll be done and ready for finish. We are now at the point with our table project where we're laying out the legs for the tapers that we're going to put on them. So I've got my legs set up in the orientation that I want, and that the side of the table will look in from this way, the end will look in this way. So our face grain is going to be here, and our 2 edge grains will be down here. And I've got them oriented the way I want them to be. So what I like to do is I like to mark them so they stay in the same orientation and the same order for the entirety of the process. And I'll just make a little square on top of here with my Sharpie. Then I'm just going to order them 1, 2, 3, and 4. That way I know I know where they're going to be at with the table. And then what I'd like to do, being that we're going to do, and I'm going to show you how to do what I call a 2 inside taper. I'm going to taper the 2 insides of it on both those edges. So I like to mark those, as in that's the face that's going to come off, so that when I get them into the fixture that I'm going to pull out and show you here in a minute, I'll make sure that I'm cutting the right faces down to get our taper. So I want that to be pretty bold. That's why I use a marker for it. And we'll get those correct. Okay, I'm going to go dig out our tapering jig that I'm going to use on the bandsaw. So we'll take a little break here for a second and we'll go dig that out. When I come back, I'll show you how that tapering fixture works and how to mark it and set it up to make these work, and then we'll go ahead and get them cut this morning. Now I have my tapering fixture out that I made, simple piece of plywood, a couple pieces of plywood as stops for it. What I want to do is I want this taper to come down about 5 inches from the top of my leg where it's going to start. So I'm going to get this down here. I'm just going to mark that as about 5 inches. And I'm doing this with a Sharpie again just so you can see it. And we're going to mark that off there to make that real visible. And then I'm going to go down here to my end, and when I'm tapering a leg, I'd like to take about 1/3 of the dimension off. And I've got 3 and right about 1/2 there, so I'm going to go here to about 1 inch and 1/8, somewhere close to that. It doesn't have to be perfect, but just in the ballpark. I'm going to mark that real well so you can see that. And the way I set this fixture up is I'm going to take my line coming down here off the side. I'm going to put my stop down here on the end. So being that this is the edge that's going to be cut next to it, I want that line coming down to intersect the face of the fixture here. So that way when I'm running this through, my start on my cut will be right on that line. Then I went down to the opposite end down here and I marked over, and I have this line again right up to the edge of our board here. So I know that when I'm cutting through, my line's going to come right down through there. Now, when I go over to set up my bandsaw, I've got about 8 3/8 there. So we'll set that up for about 8 1/2. Sometimes I will stack scraps on top of here and put toggle clamps down here to hold it in place. But when I've run this through the bandsaw in the past, I have found that as long as I'm putting my stop here on the far end and pushing it through, just the tension coming of the blade coming through holds it up nice and tight to that stop. And then on the side, I can push it into my fence here. So let's go get the bandsaw set up again for right at 8 1/2 inches. And right there is our 8 1/2 mark. That's what we need, and we need to have our guide set up at least 4 inches, so 4 inches will pass under there. That'll give us about 1/4 inch of margin to play with. And what I'm done here is I've got my marks that we put on earlier. I got my top mark here. That face is going to come off. This face is going to come off. So what I want to do is I want this face to come off first. And then when I turn it 1/2 turn, I've still got a square back here to run onto my jig. And I can take this face off. So it's important that you run them in that order. Again, this face is the first face that's facing out. That's going to get cut off. Then when I turn it, I've still got flat surfaces on both my bottoms to sit on my fence and take this one off. So let's show you how we're going to do that with our first one. Over here to the bandsaw, we've got our blade set up. We're going to clear the guides here. Let's take that up just a touch more. Give us just a little bit more margin. And we'll, of course, grab our ears because I like to protect those. And here we go. 2 inside tapers cut on a bandsaw with a tapering jig. the bandsaw, of course, you have to make sure you've got a good blade. The saw needs to be adjusted right so you'll get a nice clean cut in that space. It tends to be almost like a big resaw. Things get nice and close. It comes out nice and even on their end here. There we go. We're videoing Joe. My buddy Joe just come in to do a project this morning, and let me show you. We'll turn that over. We've got our other side that's marked here. We'll slice that off. We'll have a nice walnut leg with 2 tapers on the inside of the leg. You notice we got a good bit of walnut sawdust coming up here. That always happens on the bandsaw. Yeah, our fixture's in place, knock that off. And you'll see from this that we've got a taper on this inside and this inside, and they came out within about 1/4 of an inch, the same of each other. So there we have 2 inside tapers on our legs. We'll do that with all 4 of them, and then I'll show you what we're going to do. We'll take them over to the jointer, clean up that edge, and then they'll be ready for sanding and routing. So we'll show you how to do that when we get back after I've done the other 3. Okay, we're back with our legs. We've got them all run through the bandsaw on the tapering jig. So we've got nice tapers coming down about 5 inches from the top. And what we want to do with this little lip, and just to clean those edges up, is I'm going to run them over the jointer. And the key there is to run them so it's cutting downhill. So I'm going to start up here and I'm going to just lay them down there. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to count the number of times that I go over each face, and do the same number on all of them, so they'll end up being pretty uniform in terms of their size and all. So let's fire this up and grab our pads here. And we'll run one through real quick and show you what it turns out like. And then we've got a nice clean face, as you can maybe see that. We've got a good clean face there. We'll do this one here. We'll have our apron attached up here. A nice even taper on it. That's going to look real good. We'll get that on the table there and clean it up, and we'll route the edges and all this stuff. So I'm going to take a break. I'll save you having to watch all 4 of these legs being done, but that's how we're going to taper those down, and then we'll have them ready for sanding. We're going to mark them out to put our biscuits in there and our crate screws into our aprons, and we'll be back with that shortly. And we're back over here at the bench now. We've got our legs tapered over on the bandsaw. Now what we've got to do is we've got to take those saw marks, remove them from our legs. So I took my number 4 smoothing plate with my trusty crayon, get that lubed up so it'll roll off there real nice, and we're just simply going to run that down all the faces of our leg. Take those saw marks off. Nothing like a good sharp plane to take those off with, nice wispy shavings. That's going to do everything we need to do to smooth that down, and we will likely not have to do any sanding on that. We're going to turn the leg over, keeping it in our bench dogs on our vise here at the end of the bench. Go down this side. And again, we're just taking all of those rough marks from the bandsaw and from planing the leg down and just smoothing it out, preventing us from having to do a whole lot of sanding. And obviously we'll go all the way around all of our legs. On this face, we've got the square top where we're going to attach our apron. So we'll clean that up, and then we'll go down to the taper, run that off. Boy, that's running off there nice and smooth. The advantages of having an end vise on your bench and good bench dogs. Look at how nice and solid it holds that piece. We run that down there, clean those faces up real nice. And that literally ends up being a nearly finish ready surface for us. Corners are nice and sharp. We'll address those in a little bit to clean those up. We're going to go around all the legs, and then we'll be right back to go ahead and put our radius on all those corners. And here we are. We've got our molding plane pulled out. That is our 1/8 inch radius. Cool old molding plane, so it gives us a round over on that edge. Pretty neat to be making a modern table with a molding plane that probably dates back to the mid-1800s. And as with all the planes in the shop, we keep them nice and sharp. We set that on there, run it down over that edge. We do the top part where it's flat, where our aprons are going to attach. Then we come down and do the taper on it. Switch to our other side. A couple strokes gets us all the way bottomed out on that plane, and that'll give us a real nice radius, nice soft edge on there. Same way it would have been done 150, 160 years ago. Same tool, just putting it to a modern shop. Roll the leg all the way over, put it back into our bench dogs and our end vise. Sure beats having to get out a router, set it all up, draw an extension cord over, run a router down it. It's a lot quieter, accomplishes the same thing, probably in less time actually. Plus there's just a neat tactile experience of running a profile like that with an old-fashioned hand plane. Wooden body, steel cutter, set up to make that profile. You'll notice there's another molding plane on the bench there, a darker one. That's just a little bigger profile. If we wanted that radius to be a little larger, we would simply grab that one and make it larger, but having tested the two, decided to keep it at 1/8 of an inch rather than going all the way up to 1/4. Fortunately, Walnut cuts real nice. And the grain patterns that we selected on this, all the grain is nice and straight. We don't have a lot of squirrely grain or knots or anything to go around, so that molding plane is pulling that edge off there real nice. Nice and smooth. And again, that is very sharp. One day we'll go through an exercise and show you how to sharpen a molding plane, but for today, that's sharp enough to where we're not even going to have to sand those edges. That piece will literally be done and ready for finish when we get done putting these profiles on it, cleaning up that face with a finishing plane, putting the edge on with the molding plane, and away we go. The only thing I don't like doing it with is cross grain on the bottom of the legs, so I'll probably round those over with a sander, just to make it easy. Again, those bench dogs letting us hold that leg right tight to the fence. That end vise with bench dogs on the bench kind of ends up being a third set of hands for us to use here at the shop. Get one more leg in there. Again, really appreciating how smooth both those planes have made that particular leg. And going through all of it gives you the opportunity to see how it's done all the way down the line. And if I had to have my microphone working in the first place, you could hear it make that cut, but having to overdub this as we have, you get to watch it without having to listen to it. That should get all of our legs done away with. That smoothing plane and that molding plane accomplish what we need to put our faces in order and our edges in order on that piece. And we're ready to go. Now that we've got our legs all done, we're down to cutting our aprons to the right length, knowing that our table is going to be 72 inches long and 40 inches wide. We can determine where our leg position is going to be by figuring out what our legs dimensions are. So they end up being 3 3/4 each, and then I want 1.5 inches overhang all the way around. So I've got 7.5 inches of leg and 1.5 inches on each end, so I've got another 3 inches. So if we're going to make our 72-inch table, I'm going to have to take 10 inches, take 10 inches off of that and make our long apron 62, and our short aprons being 40 inches wide the table is, our short aprons are going to be 30 inches. So we'll mark them and cut them. And when I'm doing this, I always take it over to the miter saw, and we'll clean up one end to start with. And I almost always do this with both of the pieces cut at the same time. That way I have assurance of them being exactly the same dimensions versus being off by a 1/16 or something possibly. The whole reason for that is if I know the faces on my legs are square, and if I know my aprons all the way around are exactly the same length, guess what's going to happen? My table base is going to be very, very, very square. So I'll make my first cut to prep our end, give us a good clean end. I'll drop my pencil on the floor. One thing about that is I always hit the floor on the first try every time I drop it. Now we're going to go ahead and mark our length for our aprons. Again, right at our 30 inches in this particular case. We'll make sure that our fresh cut end is lined up and perfectly square. Both of them are set up perfectly square, so when I move the pair together, whatever cut I make, they're both going to be exactly the same. And we're going to go ahead and mark that at 30, get it set up on there, make that cut, holding it down nice and tight to the deck and to the fence. And away we go. Notice that when the cut was done, I left my hands in place until that blade came to a complete stop before I moved it. If my hand is on the board and my hand is on the handle of the miter saw, my hands can't get anywhere near where the blade's going to be. Take our legs up there, put them down to the ends. That is basically what our ends are going to be with the apron on it. Our aprons that we cut the bead molding on earlier. And the grain orientation on our legs is something we were very specific about. When you look at the table from the end, you'll be able to see the seam where the two pieces of board were joined. Obviously, we cut our long apron as well. And now we're to the point where we're going to put our biscuits into the aprons and the legs. We'll put biscuits in, then we're going to put Craig screws in, and we'll put cross members corner braces on the bottom to hold it in as well. Our aprons being 3.5 inches wide, I'm going to measure down a full 1.5 inches from the top where it'll meet the tabletop. Mark those all the way down. Always marking from the top, coming down. Again, that's just a function of consistency. Want them to all be exactly the same. Long aprons, short aprons. Do them all the same. Again, that consistency, just make sure that everything is lined up the way we want it to be. And with this particular one, when we laid it all together, put them all in there, we measured corner to corner on this table base, and it came up to within a little less than 1/16 of an inch of being perfectly square. So with our aprons, we want to put that slot about midway between the both faces on our board. So we've got our fence on our biscuit joiner set at 90 degrees. And then on the side of the biscuit joiner, there's a little red indicator that'll show us where the slot's going to be on the end of our hole. So we're going to loosen up the lock on it. We're going to turn it up a little bit to get to the point where when we put that slot in there, it's going to be dead center on the apron. And there's an indicator on the side of the biscuit joiner there that we'll use to know where that slot's going to be, because on the legs, we're going to move that up a 1/4 inch to give a 1/4 inch reveal from the face of the leg to the face of the apron, just to add a little dimension and a little shadow line. Checking again to make sure that we're right smack in the middle. Getting everything set with depth. And again, when we go to cut, we'll make sure that the fence on the biscuit joiner is on the wood, so that fence ends up being the reference. And we'll mark our legs the same way after we move the fence up. So we'll get our legs to sit in there, get that 1/4 inch reveal just to get that little extra dimension line in there. Just makes it look better. We'll cut all of our aprons with our biscuit joiner set up as it is. Then we'll move our fence on the biscuit joiner and cut the biscuit slots in all the legs. There we go. Rather than doing the tape measure on all of them, we're simply going to set our little Craig indicator to 1.5 inches. Able to set that from the top of our leg, or the top of our apron rather. Come down there, put our mark where we're going to put it, and we'll turn around and do the other end. And again, the fortunate thing about using a biscuit is the slot ends up being about 2 3/4 inches long total, and the biscuit itself is about 2 3/8. So we've got a little room for error back and forth. We've got a little margin to slide it in there. So it'll line up really good with the slot that we're going to put in the table legs and make it work. Let's go ahead and plug it in, because we always take all of our adjustments and make those with our equipment unplugged, so there's no chance of accidentally hitting the giddy up go button and making it do things that we don't want it to do while we're doing it. We'll always have the edge of our apron, and our legs too for that matter, slightly off the edge of the bench, because I want to make certain that my bench doesn't end up being my reference point. I want the fence on that biscuit joiner to be that reference point, so if I hang the piece over the edge, nothing will be able to contact it other than that fence. And when you look at that, you can see it is right smack down the middle where we want it. Again, looking at where that slot is and how long it is, being 2 3/4, somewhere in there. And our apron being 3.5 inches wide, we didn't go outside of the end, either the top or the bottom of the apron, so everything will be concealed. All the joinery will be hidden. And right on down the line we go. Key thing that's important there is fire that thing up, hit the switch, and push it in nice and slow. Don't rush it. Don't try to get in a hurry. One, it's hard on you, it's hard on the equipment, and it's hard on the piece of wood. And if you go too fast and it dives in there and catches, it can literally pull itself right out of the board and make a mess. Fortunately, with the biscuit joiner, when you retract the biscuit joiner, that blade gets hidden inside the machine. So there's not an exposed blade for the most part, but if you happen to catch it and it wants to run out of there, it can run out and it'll invariably turn up and come out the top of your piece, which will cause you to have to start all over, make your piece over, because it will be ruined. So be patient, like we always say. Let it take its time to cut. There, our aprons are all cut. We'll set those aside. And we'll go to making our markings on our legs. So the legs are what we call a two-insided taper. So the two inside faces are tapered. So we want to take a pencil. And I always like to mark where my cut or where my slot's actually going to be, just to make sure that our orientation is right on the money and right where we want it. Our mark as to where we'll place our indicator line on our biscuit joiner is going to be on a face opposite of one where the slot goes. So if I mark that slot there, when I get to putting my biscuit joiner on there to make that cut, I'll be able to see where that slot is supposed to be, so there's not any chance of messing up the orientation. And I've done that, learned that lesson the hard way. Of course, when you do that, then you got to fix that problem, fix that hole you just made. There we go, we got those to where we know exactly where we're going to make the cut. Now I'm going to put my line, my indicator, on where I want to center the little red line on the center of our biscuit joiner, where I can see that line to know how far down from the top we're coming, which is again 1.5 inches. And then I can see where the slot's actually going to be. Again, our aprons are going to go on the outside of that leg, real near the outside of it. And we'll get all those marked. We'll double check for that orientation, because there is nothing worse than cutting your biscuit slot on the wrong side of a table leg. It's not the worst thing in the world, and it can be dealt with, but we don't want to do that. Now, being that I want that 1/4 inch reveal where that apron meets the leg, I'm going to look at my indicator there that shows me that my center of my biscuit is about 3/8 of an inch up from the face. I just moved it up 1/4 inch. So we'll put that slot, and if we're moving our fence up, obviously our slot's going to go down into it a little further. We're going to add 1/4 to that equation. And what we want to end up with is basically that you can see it's going to be 1/4 inch from the face of the leg. Again, it just gives it a little textural difference. Adds a little shadow line in there. Just makes it look better. Check those orientations again. We've moved our fence up 1/4 inch. Let's plunge that first one in there and make that first cut. Turn it over, checking for our orientation to make sure we're cutting the slot out that indicates where our slot's going to be. Our little red line on the center of our biscuit joint is right on the line that we made, 1.25 inches down from the top. Let's reach over here and grab a biscuit and slide one in there just to show you how that biscuit is going to give us our orientation for where we want that apron to join into our leg. Biscuit goes in the slot. Apron goes in. And we've got our reveal there. Looks good by the time we get those all the way around. We'll have a real nice looking table base. Well, we got the aprons set into our biscuit slots here on the legs. And the more I looked at it, the less I liked it. Not enough of a shoulder here. So what I did to rectify that problem is I just plugged that hole up. I put some glue in there, put a biscuit in there. I'm going to cut it off and I'm going to move it back in about another 1/8 of an inch. So we got to take this biscuit off first. Flush cut pull saw. So it will cut that biscuit off and cut through it, but it won't mar the top of our leg here. Take just a couple pulls through there. Come on. Cooperation is mandatory. Come in from the other side a little bit. What makes these cut so well and so flat is that the teeth are not set at all. So the teeth are in the same line as the plate of the saw blade. So it will end up with no scratches on the face of our leg after we've cut this off, or if not, no, it'll be very few. Get that cleaned off of there. Then I want to take my low angle block plane and clean it up just to make sure it's clean as it can be. Real good. There, I can live with that. Now I'm going to take my biscuit joiner, set it back up. We've still got our indexing line here on the face. I've moved the fence up a little bit, so it's going to move my cut down a good bit. Set that in there and cut a new slot for it. Let's grab a fresh biscuit out of here. And let's grab our slap wrench. Put that in there. Let's set this on there. And that's much better. It probably only added about 1/8 of an inch, but that's a much better reveal on them. It just adds a little bit of a reveal there and a shadow line, a little bit of a texture element to it. I like that much better than I did before. So now we'll do all the other ones that same way. Now that we've reset that, and you'll notice that I've got a biscuit here on the other side that I messed up that I'm going to have to take out as well. So with that in mind, we'll take a little break and I'll get the rest of these cut. and then we'll show you how to put the Craig screw and the pocket holes in the ends of all of our aprons and get them attached, and we'll get this base assembled here today. Now I have the top completely finished, top and bottom. I always seal the bottom just to make sure that it's encapsulated like the rest, so moisture and humidity don't affect it near as much. And then sprayed the base, got that all ready to go. And what I did is I took this little Craig marking gauge, measuring gauge, and I set it from my 1.5 inch margin all the way around, so I could literally go to the edge of my legs here and set everything all the way around at 1.5 inches to get it right the way I need it. And then I just put Craig screws all the way around, because I did the pockets into the aprons and attached them all the way around. We'll finish off the last of them here. Again, the key there is don't strip them out. Get your impact driver. Put them in with an impact driver. Sometimes if you put them in with a drill, and I've seen some people do that, the drill doesn't basically know when to stop. It'll just keep cranking it in there. You'll end up stripping them out and they won't hold the thing. So with that, I am attached all the way around. Next thing I'm going to do is wait for help to flip this thing over, do the last little buff on all the finish, and we'll give you some pictures of that so you can see what a finished table product is going to look like. I think you're going to love this table. Check that out. 6 feet by 3.5 feet, all solid walnut. Everything about it is 1.5 inches here, aprons on it, big hefty legs. Some friends of mine want to have the experience of eating at a dining room table, and they don't have one right now, so they asked me to make this for them, so we did. And it's just a big, beautiful, heavy duty table. Here at the top of our table, there are 5 pieces of walnut put together here. Very, very good joinery. You can't see the joints. You can tell they're there because you can see the differences in the grain direction, but they're real nice and solid. We put a 1/4 inch radius around all the corners here. We did a 1/2 inch on the edge or on the corners here, but all the edges are 1/4 inch radius. On the apron down here, we just took a basic bead mold on there, put a 1/4 inch round over bead in the router table and did it that way. On the legs here, they're tapered from about 5 inches down. They taper down, and it's typically 1/3 of the dimension of the leg here at the top is what I take off to get down to our bottom, to give it a little bit of a taper, just to make it look a little nicer. And that's on the inside and on the inside, so when you're looking at it from the side or the end, you see that taper down there. It's all attached underneath, of course, with corner braces. We did Craig screws to hold the base to the table, which I've been using for a lot of years, and those have always worked really well. There's a cross member in there, there's corner braces, so it is about as solid as you could get. If there was to be an earthquake at the home where this is going to reside, I would strongly suggest getting underneath this, because it is super beefy, super strong. The aprons here are about 1/7 thick by 3.5. The top is 1.5 inches thick. The cap, or the top of the legs, are 3 3/4 inches square. So it's very solid. Great piece of furniture. It's going to do these people well for a lifetime. Their little guy, who is, I think, 5 years old now, will one day have this in his home when he grows up and has his own family. This has an M.L. Campbell conversion varnish, which is just a fancy way of saying a catalyzed lacquer that got put on it. And it's a dull lacquer because I like to see the wood. I don't want to see the shine. I don't want to see the reflection of the lights or the surroundings. I want to see the wood. And the good thing about that particular product is it's super durable as well. So it does really good at standing up to the regular rigors of the use of a dining room table. So it does a really good job. It takes a little bit to get the hang of putting it on, but it works really well. And I use it on almost all of my tabletops anymore and have for years. Real good stuff. So the challenge of this is going to be getting it out of here.
Do you ever find yourself at the end of a project saying, why did I make it so heavy?
No, it's, if I can't pick it up myself, I can always call other people and have them help me move one. And the biggest one I ever did, the heaviest one I ever did, ended up at the top of the Telluride ski resort in Colorado a couple of years ago. And it took 7 people to move the top of that table into the house. It was so big and so thick and so heavy. And that wasn't even counting the base. That was just the tabletop itself was monster heavy. But this one, you know, 2 or 3 people will be able to get this out of here and get it upstairs into the house where it's going to go. That's going to be the challenging part. And if all else fails, we can take the base off of it, extract that from the top, carry them up separate, and put them back together. But she's definitely a heavy table. I mean, just it's heavy, 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 and solid. Like I said, everything on this is walnut, except for the glue, the Craig screws, and the biscuits that are holding the legs to the aprons. Everything on it, all the rest of it is walnut. All the cross braces, the cross member underneath, everything is good old everyday American black walnut. You can't beat good old everyday walnut for a pretty table. And this just happens to be non-steamed walnut, which just means it wasn't put in a big steam pressure environment to have all the colors migrate and have it be real, I guess, homogeneous is what you might call it. It's got all the character. It's got a couple little tight knots on it. It's just got some cool character. So they're going to be real happy with their beautiful little walnut table. So go ahead and comment on that if you would. If you have questions about how it's done, we've done a whole series on the making of this table from start to finish. And you'll get to see that whole thing here shortly. A lot of details on how it's done. As I would say to a lot of students that I've had, if you can put the boards together and make a cutting board, it's the same process, just on a larger scale. So if you can make a cutting board, you can make this table. Just pay attention to the video out that we've got on this one and another one, and learn how to make a dining room table for yourself. And I will swear to you up and down on a stack of Bibles that the meal that you eat off a table that you made tastes better.